The Text Collector is the newest project from Halifax-based multidisciplinary artist Leanne Hoffman. The songwriter, poet, and visual artist's sophomore album was released in June of this year, along with her first self-published book by the same name. The book contains the 365 poems written over the course of a year that became the songs on The Text Collector. Produced by award-winning producer Aaron Costello and Hoffman herself, the album deconstructs poetry and pop music, rebuilding the pieces into a listening experience even richer than the sum of its parts. With the swirling melodies and glitzed-up production of Top 40, Leanne builds tension between soundscapes primed for pure pleasure and lyrics that address the interconnected relationship between desire and despair. Paired with 4 videos and 8 handmade art pieces, The Text Collector is a multimedia art project representing 365 days of introspection. You can find the album, the book, and the visuals for The Text Collector through her website, leannehoffman.com, and on her Instagram, HMLeanne. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Songwriter's Piano, an easy-to-use app for songwriters and lyricists to use when coming up with song ideas when there's no instrument around or nobody to play one. With the Songwriter's Piano, one can easily play commonly used pop songwriting chord sequences at the touch of a screen, in any key, in 3 different chord variations, all played on a gorgeously recorded grand piano. Download the Songwriter's Piano by Play Like Me apps today, found on both iOS and Android stores everywhere. Welcome to Women in the Music Industry, the podcast that shines a spotlight on the remarkable women who are breaking barriers and making their mark in an industry that has long been dominated by men. I'm your host, Rob Wells, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this empowering journey. Each episode of this podcast will be dedicated to exploring the inspiring stories, accomplishments, and struggles of the extraordinary women who have defied the odds and made waves in the music business. Together, we'll delve into the journeys of female artists, songwriters, producers, musicians, managers, executives, and all those who have helped play a pivotal role behind the scenes. We'll uncover the stories that deserve to be heard, as well as celebrate the triumphs, challenges, and unique perspectives that women bring to the music industry. Whether you're a fan of music, an aspiring artist, or simply curious about the inner workings of the music business, this podcast will offer a valuable perspective. Together, we'll celebrate the power of music and the strength of these inspiring women. So join us as we amplify their voices and together pave the way for a future where women in the music business are no longer the exception, but the rule. Welcome to another episode of Women in the Music Industry. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, welcome. For those of you who have been here before, welcome back. Today's guest, and this is a big one, singer-songwriter iskwew, is more than just an artist. She is a teller of stories that have impacted our past and will inform our future. Iskwē's music allows her creativity to soar as she explores a range of ambient sound effects and beats. Her spine-tingling vocals anchor a myriad of sounds, blurring the lines between sources and styles, as well as between the actual, ideal, real, and imagined, transporting listeners into a world of electronic rhythms and indigenous sounds as she draws upon her Cree Métis roots. Iskwē's genre-bending catalog includes 3 full-length albums that span a spectrum of emotions and is powered by resilience. Her debut album from 2017, The Fight Within, speaks to self-love in the face of hate, and 2019's acākosīk calls out the systematic abuses against Canada's Indigenous peoples. That album features the JUNO award-winning song, Little Star. Meanwhile, the collaborative 2022 project, Mother Love, with my very good friend Tom Wilson, is a reflection on the nature of love and culture as the pair's individual contributions blend together seamlessly. Known for her impactful stage presence as she incorporates dance and multimedia to present a completely engulfing and cathartic experience, iskwew has performed hundreds of shows around the world at iconic locations, including New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art, Central Park's Summer Stage, Ottawa's Parliament Hill, and London's Border Crossing Origins Festival, in addition to performing for the King and Queen of Sweden. Man, I got to hear all about this. Continuing to mesmerize listeners with her truly incomparable sound, iskwew has received media support from the likes of NPR, Billboard, Vice, and Entertainment Tonight Canada, along with CBC, who have named her one of the most powerful performers in the country. Wow. Iskwew is gearing up to share the next chapter of her career, where she offers a look into the gut-wrenching roller coaster that has been her recent life. Wow, what a great bio that is. That just each element that's in there, we could probably spend 2 hours just talking about that. Hi, iskwew, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm so thrilled that you're here. Big fan. And just
likewise.
So happy that you said yes to coming onto this podcast and sharing some of your knowledge and experience with us. And yeah, can't wait to dive in. Thank you so much.
Honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Where are you in the world right now?
Ooh, that's a secret.
Ah, okay. Are you in Canada? Are you in?
I mean, if I told you that, it wouldn't be a secret.
That's true. Are you on Earth? Are you?
I can't even give you that information.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yes, I am on Earth. Sometimes depends on the moment of the day.
Right.
And in this moment, yes, I am also in Canada.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. I'm not looking for specific address information or anything, but just, yeah, it's all good. It's all good. The last thing I want is a whole bunch of people coming and knocking on your door and saying, I heard you on the podcast and this is where you live.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it also depends on when this podcast is airing, because that would also change the location.
That's true.
Big mystery. You got to keep it secret and spicy.
That's true. Well, how about this? Can I ask where you're from?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I am from Winnipeg, Manitoba, born and raised.
Love Winnipeg.
It's a wonderful place.
It is. It's a very musical place.
It's a very artistic and creative place.
Yeah.
It has one of the best ballet companies in the world.
Really?
Yeah. The Royal Winnipeg Ballet is top tier globally.
Oh, I had no idea that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this could be an entire podcast on itself, me talking about how much I love the arts and culture of Winnipeg, Manitoba, and how much is invested into art there. Yeah, it's awesome.
It's incredible. You know, Winnipeg, you could easily just bypass it if you're driving through. They've got that roundabout highway that I think
you literally can just go right around it.
Yeah, completely. But when you go into Winnipeg, it's an absolutely thriving city. It's a very interesting city, but just the arts and just the amount of music that's come out of Winnipeg is crazy. Just the amount of artists and the not just musical artists, but all different aspects of art.
Well, I attribute it to the struggle. Right? Like it's a hard city. It's a tough city. It's a rough city. It's a low income city. It's all kinds of things. And I think that those sorts of elements can contribute to incredible, thriving art.
Mm-hmm. It's also a city that's kind of just out there on its own.
It really is. That was a big, when I eventually moved away, I moved away from Winnipeg almost 20 years now. I'm there all the time. My family's there. I might even be there right now. Who knows? But it was something that I really was surprised by when I landed in Ontario and then drove through some of the small towns. And I was like, oh, wow, there's small towns that are beside the big cities. And then all of a sudden you're in the next big city and there are millions of people still in all of these places, like the cities. And then the small towns are still kind of fancy and, like things like that. Whereas when you're in rural Manitoba, it's a very different vibe. You're not getting the same, or at least then, maybe parts of it have changed over the years, but it's still rural prairie towns are dramatically different.
Very different. Yes.
And the next biggest city to Winnipeg is Brandon, which is still a very small place in comparison to, like the next biggest city to Toronto.
I know rural Manitoba quite well. My parents, when they first got married, my dad was a United Church minister. And when he graduated from university, the first place where they sent him to was this tiny little town in rural Manitoba called Plumas. And Plumas, which is just north of Gladstone, if you know where that is.
Okay. I do know Gladstone.
Gladstone, which is the home of the Happy Rock, which is hilarious. As you drive into Gladstone, they have this, a lot of prairie towns, they have different things there to sort of like attract you to come to the town. And so Gladstone has this giant rock that they've painted with a happy face on it. And it's called the Happy Rock, Gladstone Happy Rock. It just kind of, There's
also a film that was done in like the 80s or something like that about a girl from Gladstone who like moved to the city or vice versa, and then like dressed up as a boy to fit in with the other boys. Like it was definitely a film from the 80s. I can't remember the name of it though.
I have to see it now. I have to find it.
Yeah,
I'll research after we're done. Yes.
Like her parents got divorced. It was very, very upsetting.
Okay. All right. But yeah, so could you take me back to growing up days and in Winnipeg? When did you first discover a love of the arts? Was it music first or was it dance first or I'll just let you take over.
Yeah, it was dance first. So my grandmother took me to see the Nutcracker when I was a month shy of turning 5. And, because my birthday's in January. So we went to see the Nutcracker at Christmas time. And then in January, when I was 5, they signed me up for ballet. And I remember taking classes. It was so like old school European, like the dance teacher. It was in this big old mansion. And she had a ballet studio like on the main floor. And I took class there for a little bit. I don't think very long, like maybe, but it was like super old school European ballet teacher in her, mansion house thing. And yeah, I was hooked from that moment on. Then I started taking dance classes at different dance studios. Again, it was like the 80s, right? So everything was called jazz, or, like the way that the style of dance has shifted and names changed, and, techniques and so on that you're studying have shifted as well. At that time, it was, in Winnipeg, everything was just like ballet and jazz. That was sort of the two streams. And then eventually contemporary found its way in. I switched over and I did start dancing with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, just in their general division, but, like 6 days a week. And it was my babysitter. I was there all the time.
How old were you at this time when you went into
to Royal Winnipeg Ballet? I think I was like 9 or 10.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Early.
So in 4 years, you had already just gone that far. That's incredible.
Like from the second I started, I was like, this is what I love. And I never really stopped. So I did for a little bit. Like the reason, here's the secret, Rob, is that I wanted to be a dancer. That was like my big dream. I wanted to be a dancer, and, like that was everything to me. And then I got mono when I was 12, 13, and it threw me off course. I had to quit everything for a year. I was bedridden for like 6 months. Like it was really dramatic. And
was that just from pure exhaustion of just pushing yourself that hard, or just
how did I get mono? I have no idea. I mean, they call it the kissing disease. I was 12. I wasn't kissing anybody at the time. So who knows where I got it from, but it's an immune disease, illness, something, right? So it's just like it wiped me out, like it killed my immune system. So I couldn't, it wasn't exhaustion from dance class, but the only way to heal, as far as I knew, or as far as our doctors said, was that I just had to be bedridden. And so it was like I didn't go to school for a good chunk of the rest of that. Like I didn't do anything. I had mono in grade 13 for 2 months, and they said that it was because I was pushing myself too far. That's the reason that they gave me. But
Now I'm hearing that it's the kissing disease, but I don't think I was kissing anybody at that point either. And,
well, I mean, it's just spread through saliva and molecules and things like that. Like it's a virus. So it's, anyway.
Wow. So it just really just threw you
so
off.
It really like side railed things. And I never fully got back into dance in that same kind of competitive way. Right. Like I continued dancing up until, I still do, but in that way where I was like, okay, this is going to be something that I can make a career out of, it just sort of like took the wind out of my sails a bit. Mm-hmm. Also, simultaneously, I was into music as well. So when I was younger than 10, I sang for the Winnipeg Girls Choir for a few years. I also sang on a children's artist's record, like as a backup vocalist. So I sang in like the school musicals and all of that kind of stuff. So I was always very active and engaged in music and art and whatnot. But my incense is like clouding me out here all of a sudden.
It's all good. I'm loving the vibe.
Yeah, right. It's very zen. Yeah. But dance was my primary love. And then it just, it all kind of, I mean, you want me to just keep rambling? I could tell you the whole.
I'm just curious, like were your parents, are they arts based or were they very much supportive of you going down all these different avenues?
They absolutely were very supportive. So my dad is my adopted dad.
Okay.
And his family is from Latvia. And his parents were both artists, as he is as well. So my grandmother was a classical pianist, incredible. Like her ear for music was like nothing I'd ever encountered since or before. Like you play her song once, she sat with it, she listened to it once through, and then it just sort of like computed through her being, and then she would play it out perfectly on the piano, and you're like, what the heck? And then my grandfather was a visual artist, as is my dad. So arts and classical arts especially were very encouraged and nurtured because I showed such a love for it. Mm-hmm. Like my sister she didn't have the same interest. She was a soccer player, is a soccer player. Everything was nurtured for her as well. But, the fact that I loved the arts for them was just like a wonderful way for us to bond.
Oh, that's great. That's great. It's interesting. Just, I find that it's what you're exposed to rather than your specific ancestry. It's just, if you have a lot of music around you, I feel like if you're musically interested, if you're interested in dance or visual art or anything like that, if you have a lot of the arts around you, then you see that as a potential of something that you can do. And
absolutely. I mean, my mom's side of the family, I grew up with my grandfather specifically, like, very closely. And my mom's dad, and he was also very encouraging and supportive, but it just wasn't his realm. So he would drive me to the lessons and, like made sure that I got there safely and cause again, like, anyways, so he was supportive and encouraging in his way as well. Like I eventually left and moved to Los Angeles, and I went, after a music career, and I went by myself. So I was in my early 20s, in LA by myself, and he was very supportive of that. I mean, we'll jump.
Yeah. Before you jump into that. So you're singing around the age of 12, you're really interested in singing. What kind of music are you listening to at this point? What's inspiring you?
I mean, the stuff that was inspiring me to sing was like Whitney Houston and Vogue, like really of the time R&B, but then also, the classics. Mm-hmm. And anything that I could really stretch and practice to, like these like vocalists, like those two that I mentioned were my top, that I would sit and mimic and try and match, like phrasings and style that way, so that I could, pull something, right, rather than just rather than just sing the lyrics, I actually, even when I was young, I would sit there and listen to the way that they would place their vibrato, way that they would do their runs, way that they would do all of these different pieces. And I would try and mimic it just to see what my vocal capability was, like what could I actually do. And stylistically, it didn't stick. Like I never wound up bringing that type of style into how I sing. However, it was the starting point for me of where I was like, okay, my voice can do stuff. Like I can stretch this. I can make it, like do interesting, different things. And that's, that became like the passion of it. I loved to sing, but I really loved to sing over vocalists that were challenging.
Very cool. Very cool. And then throughout high school, you are now starting to sing a lot. You're performing. No, not at all. Okay.
Not at all. Opposite. So I had a bit of this is something that I don't talk about very often. So here you go, Rob. I had a rocky childhood and my teenage years were especially rocky. And so junior high and high school, I was, kind of in survival mode, and I didn't, I danced still from time to time. I didn't sing at all, like outwardly. If I was by myself, yes. And the thing that was like my saving grace was actually the art room in high school. So like going in and doing visual arts. I did a lot of drugs at that time. I drank a lot when I was in junior high and high school as like, self-medicating, coping and so on. And yeah, it was the art room that was the thing that sort of kept me in school and kept me going.
Were these through art classes, or did the art teacher just basically give you free rein to go in and be free?
Both. So there were two art teachers at my high school that were incredible. One of them, like I had each of them separately at one point, and then one became my art teacher that, I don't know if it was on purpose, but I was constantly in her class. And the two of them had an open agreement that anytime I would show up in the art room, they were happy that I was just in school and like making stuff. So I was never kicked out. I was never, if I was skipping class, but in the art room, it just didn't seem to be something. Every now and then they might be like, okay, you got to go to science or, biology or whatever. And I'd be like, okay, fine. But for the most part, they let me be.
Oh, that's so good, because there's a lot of teachers that won't do that. There's a lot of teachers that think you've got to do this and that, but then the real great ones are the ones that see the potential that's within you and what really makes you shine and what you really need in your life, rather than.
It's true. And it's like when I reflect back on high school, I feel like I was well cared for by some of the teachers there. Like there was another one who noticed that I was really struggling, and he wound up creating a class for a group of us that were struggling, and some of us were friends, but then it was, it wasn't just for us. Like it was a sprinkling of sort of like the misfit kids who were having a hard time and at risk of dropping out and at risk of, all of the different things. And so they just built this class for us and they called it Think Lab. And, basically it was like a way to just encourage us to show up and a way to support us and, and that kind of thing. And that was super helpful. That wound up, that teacher, that class, like I feel like there must have been things going on behind the scenes that I didn't really know that, made it so that they didn't just like cast me aside.
I can tell you right now, I teach at a couple of different schools, and for sure there's all sorts of chatter that happens behind the scenes. Talking about this student or that student and how can we help them best, and just, almost like, figuring out a plan from a real place of love and care, and just seeing, maybe they've not had the best of situations, and how can we make this so that this is going to be a great thing and maybe a directional change for them where they just get inspired by something. I'm so happy you had that though. In high school, it was great. It was great. They can be really tough years. So what prompted you to move to LA then? You were 20, you said, when you moved to LA? That's pretty early. No. The chain of events was that
I was so in high school for like, how to say, grade up till grade 11. That's where it was extra difficult and so on. For grade 12, I decided that I wanted to go to a private school for the year because I wanted to go to law school. So I was like, well, you know what? I want to go to law school. I'd like to be a judge eventually. So I need to like snap myself back into it. So I had a full-time job, paid my way to go to private school for the year, went to private school for the year, and then was working in, just sort of like professional environments after high school, and started university at that time. So I was, I think about 20 or 20, I don't even know how old I was, 23, so 22, 20. I must have been around 21 or 22 or something like that. And Canadian Idol came to Canada for the first time and came to Winnipeg. And I was working for this investment company, and a friend of mine who I sat next to, she was like, "Ooh," and she's so excited about it. She was like, "Canadian Idol's coming and I want to go audition." And she was talking about her audition. And I went home to my partner at the time, and we had been living together at this point for like 3 years. And I was like, "I want to audition for Canadian Idol." And he was like, "Do you even sing?" And I'm like, I think so. Like, I think I can do stuff, but I haven't sang out loud for anybody since I was, like 12 years old. So I have no idea. So I made him stand at one end of the apartment, and because in Winnipeg, they're like these really old, long apartments. So it's like, you've got these long hallways and then sort of rooms that, taper off all the way through. So I made him stand at one end of the apartment, and I went to the other end of the apartment because I was so shy. And I belted out Black Velvet by Alana Miles.
Oh, wow.
And he came back in, he's like, "Yeah, you can sing. This is great. However, like if you're going to audition for Canadian Idol, you can't hide in the other room, right?" So he's like, "You need to do some, take some voice lessons," businessman or business minded. He's like, "Take some voice lessons, do some recitals, like start to feel the motions so that when the audition comes, you're not just like going in." Cause I'm like, I've been on stage for dance lots. So it's not like I don't know how to be on a stage. But sure enough, the auditions came. I made it through to the TV round. Got to the TV round, picked a Whitney Houston song, was slaying it. And then I got to the high note of "I Have Nothing." And I knew I wasn't going to hit it because I could feel the nervousness in that moment. Mm-hmm. Sure enough, missed the note. A couple of the judges went like this. I finished the song. And then before they could say anything, I was just like, "Thank you." And I left because I was like, okay, they're not going to.
Oh, no.
Like, yeah. So, but I bowed out. I was like, "Thank you for, and they were like, "Thanks." And then I left. So it's not like they fought to try and keep me there. Like my spidey senses were correct.
Okay.
I left. And then that was it. Then I was just like, okay, this is what I want to do. Like I thought that it was going to be law, but I'm like, nope, this is, like I reconnected to my art side. And that was it. I don't know, like maybe a year later, we moved to Toronto. So I continued studying voice and performance and stuff like that. And then we moved to Toronto, lived there for, I think I was there a year and a half max.
Okay.
And that's the point that I left for the States.
And why LA? Why were you thinking about pursuing a music career in LA, getting contacts in LA?
Oh my gosh, this is hilarious. I haven't told these stories publicly. So I went down when I was living in Toronto, a girlfriend of mine and I went down to the All-Star Weekend in Vegas. And I was chatting with somebody there, and I was coupled. So I was, I don't know, small town. It's like when you're coupled with somebody, you're coupled with somebody. This was, like long before the era of ethical non-monogamy and, all the things. So I was just like, this is my person, and blah, blah, blah. And so I went to Vegas with a girlfriend of mine, and we were sitting at this hotel lounge having a drink, like having brunch one day during the time. And I met this guy there, and he was really nice. And, and I, like I said, I'm naive, small town. I'm just like blabbing on about my boyfriend. And he's like, yeah. And then I'm also like blabbing on about how, like I'm going after a career in music and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, listen, if you really want to go after music, you need to get out of Canada. Like you need to he lived in New York. He's like, you need to either come to New York or go to LA, but you need to, like put yourself in the big pond kind of thing. And I was like, okay. And then he's like, I respect the fact that you are partnered. I have an extra bedroom. If you want to come and use New York as a landing pad, come and stay as long as you'd like. You've got your own space, get your own key, come and go, blah, 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 blah. But at least you can get your feet wet in New York. Right. And then, so I was like, okay, cool. And this was the time of MySpace as well. So I was like, okay, like I had some pals that I knew through MySpace that lived in LA. And so I was like, okay, I'll go to New York for a couple of weeks, and then or a week or whatever. I don't know how long it was I had intended. And then I'm like, and then I'll go check out LA and I'll see which one feels better. So I get to New York, and little old naive me, of course, is staying with this person. And then sure enough, within like a very short window of time, I'm getting kicked out because my plan was still, as we had laid it out, but I guess his plan was different. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I have to leave this apartment. I'm now going over to Los Angeles, and I was supposed to stay with a friend of a friend. And she's like, well, it was the day of my flight to LA. And she's like, listen, I'm going to go, I'm shooting I've been booked for something. So can you come in 2 weeks? And I'm like, well, no, like I can't stay here anymore. I'm also, keep in mind, like I'm still very young and naive. And this is like at the beginning of my understanding of how to travel and that you can change flights and stuff like that. In my mind, I'm like, no, this is my ticket. Like that's it.
It is what it is. It
is what it is. Right. So I wound up hitting up a pal of mine, a MySpace friend. And I was like, hey, I'm coming to LA. And they were like, great. Do you have a place to stay? And I'm like, oh, thank God. No, I don't. And they're like, great. I've got a couch for you here. I live with, it was a 3-bedroom place. I live with 3 other artists. They're all, like all Indigenous, all artists. All of them were Indigenous. All of them were artists. They're like, come be a part of our family. And They invited me in, and I got there, and it was perfect. And I wound up staying. Like he moved out, that one friend moved out, and I took over his bedroom, and then I stayed with the other roommates, and I lived there for years. And it was awesome. They're all, like to this day, we're all still wonderful friends.
That's amazing. So
it was a very nice turnaround to the beginning of the story.
Yes. The New York situation, you could have definitely done without. But I'm so happy that you found that in LA. So you get to LA, and, you based off this advice that you need to be in LA if you want to have a serious go at a music career. So are you now writing songs? Are you recording songs? Are you meeting lots of other songwriters, producers? How's it going?
Yeah, all of the above. I was working on my first record, which I did wind up releasing. It's a self-titled album. But it doesn't exist anywhere anymore, I don't believe, which is why it wasn't listed in what you read off earlier. But it was a very interesting experience. It took years. Like, I think it took something like 7 years from the day that I started it to the day that I finally released it. And yeah, like moving to LA as a early 20s single female in the early 2000s was a very different beast, And so, yes, like I wound up lucky and living in a great place where I had great pals, and I built some incredible friendships. And a lot of the people that I met during that time are still dear, dear friends to this day, like who I see regularly and so on. So it was that side of it was beautiful and positive. But then it was still the entertainment industry, which is its own beast. And when you are, like I said, when you're young and single and female, it's, it's you got to be very cautious. So it came with a lot of, interesting lessons, some of them good, some of them hard. But it was a crash course in the industry, that's for certain, and it helped formulate my plan for how I wanted to run myself as an entity later on, and how I wanted to not rely on others to build my career, and how I wanted to, it helped me put those pieces together, which was great. But it was hard. It was a difficult lesson. Like, the lessons to get to that were not simple. They weren't, they were complex.
This industry has a long way to go, but it has come a long way since 2008, for sure.
Yeah.
My own wife has told me crazy stories about her going to New York and having meetings that really quickly turned from professional to very non-professional very, very quickly. Not just them, but just like pretty much almost everybody that she had meetings with. But occasionally she would come into contact with somebody that's just like, you're actually a good person. And then she started to build a team of people that were all really good people. And I find the same thing for me too. It's just, I've worked with thousands of songwriters, but I have my group of 30 that I love writing with, where it's just, we really get along. We really see eye to eye. They're good people. I can laugh with them. I can trust them. I can say whatever is on my mind. And then we get a great product at the end of the day. We end up working on good stuff. So did you start to find your own team of people that in LA that you found like, you could trust and you could work with, and there's no weirdness at all?
No, not really.
Really?
I found that in friendships, but not in colleagues.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, my experience in the industry in Los Angeles was not favorable. I wound up moving back to New York eventually, and that's where I kept, at the time I had this sort of gravitational pull taking me back to New York, so that even though my apartment was in LA, I still spent a lot of time in New York until I just physically packed up my place in LA and moved, permanently, or, moved physically to New York. And that's where I developed a really strong musical network. I had a great manager at the time who was kind and awesome and trustworthy and driven and, compassionate. We did like volunteer work together, and, he was a really good human being. And then I have a lot of collaborators, songwriters, other artists that were great to work with. A lot of MCs I wound up working with at that time. So one of them is M1 from Dead Prez. We worked together at that time. And again, it's, another one that's just been a forever friendship that has started from that, from that working relationship. So it's been cool. But yeah, for me, the majority of where I connected in music relationships was New York.
It's interesting. New York's got a completely different vibe musically than LA does. Completely.
Well, and it was much more of my vibe, right? The art of it was so, the art and the hustle, I couldn't really get behind the pretending that you weren't doing anything while you were still hustling your ass off behind the scenes of LA, where it's, you'd spend most of your time trying to convince other people that you just, go to the gym or drink coffee all day long. Meanwhile, it's like you've got 12 jobs and you're doing all of these other pieces. And again, this was then. I can't speak to it now. This was like early 2000s. Yeah,
I really do find like a massive difference between New York and LA, just as far as work ethic goes. And just,
it's the proverbial debate, right? Like, you New York or you LA?
Yeah, I heard this really funny thing, and I'm repeating myself again because I think I said this on another podcast. But the difference between New York and LA is quite funny. They say that those in New York will make you feel terrible, but they'll help you. Like, if your tire is flat, they'll say, what's wrong with you? Get out of the way and I'll fix that tire for you. You're an idiot, whatever. But then they end up fixing it for you. And then those in LA are like, oh, I'm so sorry that you have a flat tire, but you know what? I've got to go. I've got a meeting. Yeah. And they just leave you there. It's just, yeah. Yeah. But then New York
has been my experience.
Yes. Sorry for repeating this on yet another podcast, but the music though is a lot more, hip hop based. It's just like that's the place where hip hop was created. Basically, is the streets of New York, and it's got a lot more electronic elements to it. So I know for you musically,
it's a lot less pop.
Yeah,
like or not even pop, but like a lot less. I guess pop.
Yeah, but it's a little bit more dirty, I think, a little bit more textured, less pristine, less polished.
Well, the hustle's in your face there, right? Like people aren't afraid to be like, I'm working hard. I'm proud of how hard I'm working. So it feels more, or it felt more like liberating to create in a way where it's like, yeah, this is hard. I want to try new things. I want to experiment. I don't want to worry about, boxes of what beauty is or what, like I should sound like. In LA, I was being very molded into something that I wasn't.
Yeah.
So that first record, you can hear it on that album because it's, some of it, it's just like has nothing to do with me, but it was, somebody else being like, you've got a good voice. You sound like a neo soul singer. So let's make you, I want you to sing this way. And even though I wrote all of the songs, still the way they were produced, the way they were, like arranged and so on, it was so much the other person all the time.
Yeah.
That I was like, when I sit back and listen to that record, I'm like, wow, like I don't feel myself in it.
It's a representation of your years in LA, basically. It's
except for the moment where, because it does include some stuff that I was doing in New York, and you can hear that transition. You can hear the difference between the two.
Yeah.
Right? And like, so yeah, it was interesting, like sonically, even aesthetically, like the shoots that I did when I was in LA to the shoots that I did when I was in New York, and I felt more liberated to be an artist and try stuff and be weird or, and not have to be like, oh, I need to be beautiful. I need to, like everything has to be perfect. And here's my ass. And, it was like, I got to do other stuff and it was really well received. And I was like, okay, great. Like I found the mothership here.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So your first album is out, the one that we can't find online, but now are you starting to work on album number 2? Is that the plan when you're in New York? That is a big focus with your manager and the team that you're amassing in New York? Are you starting to work on the next album?
No, because I hadn't yet released the first one. So I released the first one like a hot second after I came back to Canada. I eventually left New York and then moved back to Toronto. And it was shortly after that I released the first one. And that was in like 2013, I think.
Can I ask, what was your reason for coming back to Toronto?
Love.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good reason.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one came out in 2013. And at that point is when I started immediately working on the next one. And then that's when The Fight Within came out in 2017. So that it didn't take as long to do the second record.
Okay. And that's the first record that we can hear online.
Correct.
Okay. How did the direction of your lyrics, your music start to change as you're working on the second record?
Well, the second one I was, so The Fight Within, how about we'll use the titles. The 2017 Fight Within, that one was more, I was feeling more frustrated and more like with state of the world, state of affairs, state of treatment of Indigenous people, these sorts of things. And so the conversation started to shift into a more lens of community support and me wanting to talk about things that were bothering me, right? So it had more of a social climate, like an air of social climate involved. So it wasn't just, in support of Indigenous people. Like there's a song where I talk about environmental concerns and like climate change basically. And, you know, but it was a social commentary, that record. And again, it was me coming out of this space of feeling like I had to talk about other things all the time, you know, that I wasn't identifying with at that time, right? Like the self-titled record to this one, you know, the conversation was quite different. And so for The Fight Within, I was really battling this, like, that's why I called it that, because I was battling this state of wanting to be more of an advocate for things, more of, you know, an advocate for the areas that I wanted to see change and so on. But then also feeling restricted by, well, if I go too far down that path, nobody's going to want to listen, you know, like I have to think about how I'm presenting it. And I had to start making sort of those kinds of decisions and so on. But that, you know, like, and the personal elements of that record were, you know, I had loved ones who were really struggling with depression and different mental health. And so there's elements of that as well. But again, like this album was very, you know, I hadn't yet found the strength to connect my own stories into it, right? Like my own sadness, my own emotions, you know. It was easier at that time for me to have conversations that meant a lot to me, but I was able to sort of have a little bit of a space between my actual sentiment, like the realness of what this feeling was, to what I was saying. So even though I felt very connected and passionate about what I was saying, it was, you know, it wasn't as vulnerable for me as an individual.
You were keeping the personal connection very much out of it and just really just talking about things that were important to you at that time. As the albums continued, though, did you find that more of the emotional impact of how these things were affecting you, was that appearing on the next albums after?
Yes, okay. Exactly. Absolutely. The next one, acākosīk, that one was written from a place of rage and sadness, you know, so my emotions were deeply connected to that record. And that one was very much a social commentary on the treatment of Indigenous people. And so my mother is Cree Métis, mm-hmm. and my adopted dad is, who I just call my dad, is Latvian. But I grew up with my mom's dad. So I grew up, you know, like very much in the culture and community. Mm-hmm. And it, so it was something, but at that time was bubbling over, right? There were a lot of things that were taking place in the news, regarding our women going missing and being killed, regarding children that were being killed, and how media was reporting on these stories, and how, you know, the deeply rooted racism that exists was being further perpetuated by media headlines and so on. And so that it was just like, it was so much all the time coming from all these different directions. And I was just like, bleh! And that's what acākosīk was rooted in, was that sensation of like, bleh! But again, you know, like heartbreak and rage and sadness and fear and all of these different pieces, paired with me wanting to really show people a beautiful side of Indigenous culture. Mm-hmm. You know, a beautiful side of Indigenous storytelling, a beautiful side of, you know, indigeneity in art, in mainstream art, in, you know, like all of these different pieces. And so that's where the story of acākosīk for me came from, was I wanted to bring people in. And yes, the lyrics of the songs addressed these issues, but I wanted to do it in a way that welcomed people who might not have a solid understanding or education in what, you know, and not formal, but just like an understanding or of what's been happening, what continues to happen, but also from a place of wanting to find that pocket of empathy, right? Like that space of empathy in people where I'm like, let's connect through that. So it's not me just yelling at you, like do better. I'm like, no, like let's find our humanity in this together and find that bridge, that tie, that, whatever it is that connects our beings so that we can understand each other and understand that really what I'm saying is not that I think Indigenous people should be treated any differently. It's exactly that. It's that I'm like, all of our children are important, whether you are from whatever country you're from, whatever language group you're from, whatever cultural group you're from, where, like wherever on this planet or beyond you are from, your children are important to you and our children are important to us, like, and that's a thing that we can really connect on and understand. And that was the space that I wanted to reach people, is like, it starts from that understanding of, like we just want to see our young ones do well, and we want to love them, and we want the world to love them. And so if I want that for my kids and you want that for your kids, well, I want that for your kids. And I hope you want that for my kids.
It seems like such a simple request, but yet it's so complicated as you dive deep into it. It's so unnecessarily complicated. It's crazy. I follow this person, Drew Binsky is his name, and he's on Facebook. And he has been to every single country on the planet. And
wow.
It's amazing. And he's got all these videos that show what the country is like and everything. And basically, like, his message is just that we are all children of the earth. That doesn't matter what country, what religious background, whatever background it is. We all have the same wants and desires, which is respect, safety, food, shelter, food, water, love. Yeah. It all just boils down to the same thing, and just everybody should have access to all of those things. And it's absolutely heartbreaking, all of the things that have come to light in the past few years, just here in Canada, of the schools, all the young children that they are finding that are buried.
And these are stories that we've been saying for eons, and now there's additional proof. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's a strange thing for me to try and understand. Like, it's impossible for me to understand how we can undervalue each other's existences. I don't get it.
I don't get it either. I don't get it either. I do love, however, though, that your songs are not just saying, isn't this world a terrible place? It's like, here's the crap that's going on. How can we work together to make this better? How can I show you the beautiful life of the place where I've come from and the people that I know? And how can we make this a better situation for everyone?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that, your first record, you were thinking, who's going to listen to this? You had all these things that were bothering you. And then this next record that you're doing is you just need to let it all out, everything that you're going through. And I know that you have found your audience. I know that people are also listening to this and getting the message, and it's making waves all over the place. Obviously, everybody is really finding that these songs connect with them as well. Even though they're deeply personal to you, you're writing in such a way that everybody really truly gets it.
Oh,
it's making changes. It's incredible. It's something very much to be admired. Where does the future of your music take you? What are you thinking about doing? Sound wise, is there a change? Lyric wise, are you covering other topics? What are you thinking about doing in the future?
Well, I've started releasing new music. So a few months ago on 4/20, I released a tune called I Get High featuring Nina Hagen. And it's a song that is produced by the legend, the wizard, Damian Taylor. And he's incredible. He's, worked with Bjork, The Killers, Bomba Stereo, like all kinds of brilliant bands and artists.
Fantastic.
And it's a song, I mean, it's playfully on the nose. Of course, we released a tune called I Get High on 420. But when you listen to it, it's actually, in the way that I like to do things, it's a metaphor for something. It's a metaphor for taking better care of each other and not being so quick to try and cancel somebody out just because you think that the seats are limited at the table, basically, right? So it was a bit of a response to an experience, a very painful experience of mine, where I was attacked on the internet, and I wanted to address it, but from a place of like, hey guys, like, let's be in this together. Like if you succeed, I succeed. If I succeed, you succeed. If they succeed, we succeed. Like, let's be a unit in this, instead of assuming that there's one seat at the table and we have to fight over it all the time. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's the underlying message of the tune. And that's sort of the jump off point for the new music that I've been releasing. So since then, we have 2 additional singles. One's called Sure to Come, and the other is called End of It All. And they're very personal, very, very personal. And so this is, I'm now releasing music from writing and releasing music from this very vulnerable spot where, it took me to just say in this podcast, I got attacked on the internet and therefore I wrote this response. It took me so long to even feel remotely comfortable being able to say that out loud. Right. Wow. So this is from a very different place. It's very much Sure to Come is a conversation. The lyric in it is someday I'll be forgotten. That day is sure to come. Might be tomorrow, may have already begun. And again, it's this very like from this place of like this, we could, life can change so quickly. You have no control over what legacy you're going to leave behind. You have no control as an artist, who's going to like what you do, who's going to care, who's going to, and being able to admit that to myself instead of trying to win people over, I was like, okay, that feels better. Even though it was still a scary step to like put my foot out there and be like, you know what? Maybe this will reach people, maybe it won't, but I have to just accept that, I have zero control over any of it. And there was comfort in that,
I think that's a message that a lot of people need to hear as well.
Yeah, well, it feels really timely for me, right? In this era where, I grew up before the internet, and now everything is on the internet. And I'm like, ugh, even though I've grown through it, I'm like, I remember a time, like I remember getting having my first cell phone, and it was the one that, like one of those Motorola's where you had to pull up the antenna and pull down the flip. And I remember getting my first text message, and it came across the screen in orange font. It went like this, and if you missed it, you had to wait for it to go back around, right. Like it was looping through, right? And so, I remember the days of, if we didn't catch each other, if we said we were going to meet somewhere at a certain time, you just had to be there. And I feel the fastness of everything. I sound like an ancient person right now, and I'm totally okay with that. But I feel the speed of everything. And I'm like, I can't control any of this. I have to let it go. I can't control anything, like how I'm received, any of that, because first of all, what people see, they make up their own stories anyway. So you're like, okay, well, if you're going to just think, we've never met, but you're going to think, all of these things about me, well, then have at it. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Right. But then also trying to keep up with how things are changing so quickly, and what's the next way to stay relevant and current. And it's getting faster and faster and faster. And I'm like, like, I don't know how to keep up in that. I don't know that I want to keep up in that. And I think that that's, like a fine place for me to be and talk about, right? Like, yeah, maybe I'll be forgotten sooner than I think. like maybe I've already been forgotten. I have no idea. Like I can't control it, but I'm going to make my art and I'm going to invite you along. And if it works for you, it works for you.
I'm the same way with music production. I've kind of stopped chasing, the charts, basically, chasing what's the current sound, because it is changing so fast. And every day there's 100,000 new songs that are being uploaded to Spotify. So I just basically, I chase whatever's in my heart. I chase whatever moves me musically and production wise and songwriting wise. I'm not really thinking I need to write a song that sounds like this artist or this particular track. It's more just writing from the heart. And I find that that's the stuff that really matters to people these days. Those are the ones that, out of the 100,000 songs that get uploaded, those are the ones that really impact people the most, I find.
Well, I've noticed that about music or just art in general, is that it's cyclical, and depending on the era of time, like, when the pandemic was starting and everybody was at home and the world had stopped, we wanted to feel good. We wanted to not, we wanted things to be light and easy and help distract us. And, and sure, not every single person, but, the general scope of things was like, oof, like just make this easier, make it better. And then the shift came and we started to become, overwhelmed by the negatives, like all of the really difficult stories that are in existence, the way the planet is suffering and how, like what's happening to humans as the planet is suffering and what we're doing to it. And how, and the messaging now is, the second you don't like somebody, you strive to have them disappear. And, so that now we live in this kind of fear space, right? Where there's so much stuff happening and it's overwhelming. And I listen to what people are saying and I hear the stress of overload of information, right? Like people are feeling overloaded with information. And so I think there's now, we're sort of cycling back through where there's going to be more space for the direct emotional conversation again. Mm-hmm. Right? The connection to each other rather than the extreme separation. We want to hear from the artists that we like, and we want to hear their beings. Like we want to feel good things, but we also want to feel connected because we're in an era right now where connection is really difficult.
Oh, I love that. I love just the progression of where you're going to go musically and lyrically. And just those are just the first two songs that you've mentioned. You have a third song coming out now as well?
I do. It's called End of It All. And it is about the end of my marriage. So it's, it again, a very personal song that I never thought I would be able to do before. In fact, at the JUNOs a few years ago, I was sitting on the stage. This was when it was in Vancouver, and I was doing the songwriter circle, and I was on stage with Jan Arden, Scott Hellman, Rose Cousins, and myself.
What a lineup.
It was an awesome show. And Scott Hellman played a song, and of course Jan made a joke about, because it was his most popular tune, and she's like, "Well, you're going to sing that for the rest of your life," and he made a joke about how after I performed a tune, and it was quite it was a politically charged song. And he's like, man, on stage, he's like, man, I would love to be able to write that. All I can ever write are love songs. And I joked back and I was like, man, like I'd love to be able to write a love song, but I can't seem to find that, that button or whatever. So my ex-wife jokes that the one and only love song I've written and recorded is about our divorce.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, but it really, we're wonderful friends. The struggle was difficult, but we got to a really good place. And so it's a good spot to be.
I think it's a great thing to write this stuff down. I've gone through things myself, and just when you write, it just allows you to let that go.
Exactly.
Out into the world, let it out of you and out into the world and see what it does. And it's therapy. It's therapy to write. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Listen, I don't want to take up very much of your time, but I love talking to you. I think we could talk for hours. I have so much more that I feel like there's a part 2 because I want to know about all you're working with Tom Wilson and everything else. But I'm just curious because this podcast really much, I want to inspire the next generation of young females or those that identify as female, that there is a possibility of a career in the music industry. Do you have any words of advice of anything that you've gone through? Anything that you can help steer them around or just something that would just inspire them to know that there's a possibility for them to have a great career in this field?
I honestly, I think it is finding your own conviction. What is it that makes you feel good in your art, and stick to it? And that will be the thing that you can lean on, because it's a really difficult industry. It's a fast evolving industry. But the thing that I found has helped me the most is being true to myself and allowing that to be the piece that I get to constantly come back on and fall to and turn to. Yeah. You're
definitely living that.
Yeah. And I say that it doesn't mean it's the easy decision or the easy way to go, but it's the thing that it feels the best in the end, and it feels sustainable, right? Like, because we only have ourselves. This is the biggest thing that I've learned in this lifetime. You can count on people to an extent, but at the end of the day, we only have ourselves. And if at the end of the night, at the end of the day, you can look on the choices that you've made and say, okay, I'm good with the majority of things. Yes, I might have, had I spent more time, shifted this or whatever, but really and truly you're being true to yourself, then that's going to be the key to longevity in your being and your art and whatnot. However it, inspires you to keep going.
I love that you are making music that really is so important to you and important to everybody, so that every night that you stand on stage or day or whenever you're performing, you are proudly singing these songs, and your message is getting out there, and it's nothing that you're embarrassed about. It's nothing that you don't believe in. You like fully believe in every single word of every single piece of music that you're making. And I'm so happy that you have this voice and this opportunity to do this and to spread information around the world and draw attention to amazing causes, things that we need to talk about and change people's lives. It's very, very happy that you are doing this. Really, from the heart, it's just I'm so inspired by this, and I hope that others listening to this will be inspired as well to really follow what's important to them and really sing the songs that are important to them and that really matter to them, rather than trying to be something that they're not.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Iskwew, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
This has been great. Great to finally meet you and to spend some time and get to know your story. Again, I'd have you for a part 2 or a part 3 or part 4 if you're around. And you're down. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and we will talk to you soon.
Have a beautiful day.
Okay. You too.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Stay tuned for the next episode of Women in the Music Industry, coming soon. Let's embark on this incredible journey together, celebrating the women who are reshaping the music business one note at a time. If you enjoyed hearing this podcast, please take a moment and give it a like, a rating, or a follow. Your support helps immensely. We'll see you next time.